No. 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 No.
Tier lists. When people want to find easily accessible and compressed information about effective variants in Skullgirls Mobile, this will always be the most common method, in rating a select few number of variants, usually sorted by either rarity or character, in S to F tiers, or rather SS for the highest because for some reason we needed a second S, I don't know. But as you already could have guessed by the title of the video, me and a fair share of people believe that tier lists are not the most accurate or appropriate way for it, despite how frequent they are. Well, obviously there's a fair share of reasons, but before getting into it, it's important to discuss the fundamentals of a tier list. Before getting started, and I need to heavily stress this, just because I don't talk on a positive note about tier lists, it does not and should not detract from your ability and enjoyment from making one. The last thing I want to do is to take that away from you. But with that said, let's get started. By definition, a tier list is a visual representation of a subjective ranking of elements from a determined niche, popularized by video game media. This makes sense as the first games to ever implement a community tier-based ranking method were fighting games like Street Fighter and Super Smash Bros., where matchups, their tools, and therefore tournament viability would be elements of great importance in order to be ranked as high as possible. Eventually, tier lists would also be implemented into lesser to straight-up non-competitive subjects, but that's beside the point. Anyway, with mobile's release, it was a matter of time before it would get a tier list of its own. Surely with this many variants there should be some sort of method for classifying them, and tier lists seem like the best choice possible for being easy to make as well as accessible. And while I won't deny the appeal in its simplicity, there are a few cracks in the formula that makes it any list virtually flawed.
Detective Porsche.
I mentioned before that tier lists were a subjective matter, but of course opinions and perspectives are bound to be different between people. Therefore there's always going to be disagreements, and unfortunately it's somewhat inevitable. There may be objective, unanimous positions like expert on a high tier and private dick on low, but then there's more debatable stuff like whether people find Graveyard Shift worth it or not. Overall, it's a matter that really can't be done much about, even when trying to implement as much as objective value as possible. The biggest factor that usually plays against tier lists' favor would have to be variant roles. Generally there's about 3 main types: offense, defense, and support, and rating them at the same time makes it more difficult to sort stuff. For example, what makes Red Velvet work is not the same for Harlequin, yet both are really good variants at what they do, so does that mean they can fit the same high tier despite such heavy differences? It feels rather messy to often put everything combined, due to the fact that the niche a variant covers, as well as its respective methods like character kits and so on, differs a lot from one another, so oftentimes it's required or at least much preferred to order and distribute based on these roles, rather than a gross overgeneralization. Obviously, every tier list is bound to be dated, with the addition of new variants and buffs. The game is constantly changing, therefore any sort of review will inevitably age. Anything featuring Mommy Dearest at a low tier is now rendered somewhat outdated because thanks to her recent string of buffs, she's been able to spike up into a desirable state. And just imagine anything with the very first version of that soul, folks. Again, much like subjectiveness, this is something inevitable and with no real solution outside of directly updating it, so it can't be hammered too much either. Here's the thing about where to implement the tier lists. They're way better fit for rifts. Any list that focuses on prize fights, while it may be accurate, is flawed by the fact that with enough investment, any variant can still pull off results in the end, and everything will take you to the same 2 outcomes of either a win or a loss. So even if you succeed with the more effective character, a different one could have potentially taken you to the same outcome, though at the same time don't expect Scared Stiff pulling off massive longshots at Streak 50, so only take this claim with a grain of salt. On the other hand, rifts are much more execution dependent, requiring specific variants in order to try and secure the highest scores possible. Additionally, both modes would end up making use of different ratings. The best example of this is Perminator, great in prize fights thanks to her infinite damage scaling, but this proves far slower and less efficient when taking rifts into consideration. As such, if she is to be ranked, it would have to be on either an average level or split results. Personally, I find Nearly Departed an overall good variant with very considerable niches for rifts. However, a lot of people differ in that opinion, whether it is because of her low stats and timing dependent ability, making her a tricky choice. Now, I often consider that Nearly Departed works for me because of the good set I have ready for her, which makes up for her low attack. Would that make my opinion lesser due to making use of a jacked up set? Another much clearer example would have to be Risky Ginger, a diamond variant that possesses high attack plus Parasol's excellent kit, but has the catch of an ability which asks for intersecting skill, which usually serves as the perfect excuse to dump her down a lot of tiers. I mean, fuck me, man! This is a pretty big divide between the veterans capable of making niche but good variants work and beginners who are just starting off. Like, on the hands of a level 10 account, Risky may not be the best choice, and by that same logic, a Coldstone falls short for a level 70. It only adds another layer of complexity towards rating something, and the idea of separate beginner and veteran tier lists sounds rather ridiculous. But the former usually wants to resort to some sort of easy help, to which I'd like to give a shout out to Scoria's notably strong, cheap budget variants. It's well explained and very helpful, and I highly recommend it. While the game favors a select few of variants over others, I mean just look at rifts, bring back defender diversity, it actually allows for mostly anything to work, at least as long as the player can make up with the moveset and supports. This line of experimentation, however, becomes much less effective considering the Lisa's presence. Now, that's not to say that X-Bands were secretly good all along, but rather more often than not, there hasn't been a large amount of testing for some of these to fully know their qualities. In some cases, you could argue it's understandable, as they require considerable stats compensation and very specific plays to try them out at their best. But as is, it's fair to say that tier lists can work as a barrier for giving niche stuff a shot, and aim for the meta stuff only. Yet I can't really blame them that much, since more often than not people are much more interested on what's proven to work really well over niche choices that require much more effort and experimentation. It's easy to bitch about how tier lists are flawed and leave it at that, but I also would like to offer some sort of alternative. Before we get there though, I wish to clarify that my star rating is far from perfect. Much like tier lists, it serves the purpose of a simplified score value to easily display if variants are good or not. But again, it's flawed for mostly the same reasons as stated earlier. That being said, my take on an ideal rating system would be by looking at a variant's capabilities and evaluating how proficient they are at it. We'll put Mean One as an example, for no real reason, I promise. For starters, it's advised to establish clearly what her role would be. In this case, it'd be exclusively an attacker. Other roles would include defender, offensive support, and defensive support. In terms of the tools she has available in her ability, Mean One has access to Enrage, but it's rather specific as it depends on whether the enemy may gain buffs or not. Under the right context, it's very easy to stack up to 5, but in a non-buff fight, she won't get anything, to which I feel a 7 out of 10 would be accurate. In terms of the buff conversion, it falls on the same pit of relying on enemy buffs for it to be active, and another 7 out of 10 would feel right for me. Finally, there's the debuffs to come out of the conversion, which happen to be randomized, and while they gradually disable the enemy, you can't really control what will apply, so either a 5 or 6 out of 10 would fit. It's also advised taking into consideration a variant's kit in case it provides additional features, like Curse for Squiggly and Eliza, or meter control for Fuqua, as well as splitting between prize fight and rift functionalities. But with all this being said, would it actually be worth the effort?
El que pintó el dibujo de la calle en la baranda del puente, un reverendo hijo de puta.
There is some worth in tier lists. Even despite all the flaws I pointed out, there's a good reason why people keep making them. It all lies on the fact that they're simple and easy to understand. Perhaps my rating proposal is more accurate, perhaps not, but it certainly sounds a lot more complex compared to putting something on S rank. With all that being said, what really is the best solution? My answer is that even if something is rated good or badly, stick with what you find fun. It's that easy. Ratings can spell out the positives, negatives, what to actually build and what not, but they can truly tell you if they'll end up being a fun variant to use, because at the end of the day, that's up to you to decide. No, but seriously, where the fuck did SS tier even come from? Zog, what the actual fuck, dude? Promote my shit.